Hey everybody, welcome back to the Fantasy Football Databank for Week 4. I'm your host, Bobby Lamarco, the Fantasy Football X Factor. As you know, the rundown, I'll be going through every game. I'm not going to go into early game previews in too much detail. I did have that posted on my video from earlier this week, so go check that out. I dive into each game with a lot of detail, so I'm just going to bring some updates from an injury standpoint and things you need to be monitoring for the Week 4 games. So let's get started. For the first game is going to be the Lions versus the Saints. Now, the biggest thing with the Lions and Saints game is the injuries. So right off the bat, offensively for the Saints, you're going to be down Michael Thomas and Jared Cook. They also lost guard Andrus Peat. So it is interesting that right now today, the Lions are a underdog at home even against the Saints with these injuries. I think this is a good news thing from the sense that you're going to have more centralized targets for Alvin Kamara, for example, but also Traquan Smith and Emmanuel Sanders against Detroit's defenses are now going to have a little bit more security from a target volume standpoint. I think that puts them both on a wide receiver 3 map. Now, also for the Saints injuries on defense, they'll have no Marshawn Lattimore and no Janoris Jenkins. Now, this is big news because also Marcus Davenport, so there's a lot of injuries to the Saints D. That is big. So I think this week, player prop-wise, I love Kenny Golladay over 4.5 receptions. I think he's going to be the focal point of the offense. We saw this last week where he had 6 catches against a very tough Arizona defense, who's one of the best at stopping wide receivers. So I think Kenny Golladay continues to play very well. I think Matthew Stafford at home, I do believe he's going to be a very productive day with these injuries. So I think you're starting Matthew Stafford. I think you're starting Kenny Golladay. Marvin Jones, to me, is a little more of a risk, but now with no Janoris Jenkins, you have to like his matchup. So I think him, along with Kenny Golladay and Matthew Stafford, and also I do like T.J. Hawkinson because the ground game is going to struggle against Detroit. Against the New Orleans Saints. So I'm not expecting a monster day from Adrian Peterson, but the injuries to the offense and also the defense for the Saints does allow better game flow for Adrian Peterson to be productive. So if you're in a bind and you're looking for just an RB2 to put up points, I think Adrian Peterson is actually a nice play this week at home with all these injuries. So I think he is startable, and maybe he does get in the end zone and gives you a big week. But I think from a volume standpoint, it's more secure now as this line will probably move closer to 1 or 2 because of the injuries to the Saints. Now, on the Saints side, we kind of covered it. It's basically Alvin Kamara. Lat Murray is interesting as well. They are technically still away favorites. But at the same time, I'm not really 100% on Lat Murray unless he gets in the end zone. So I can't tell you whether or not he'll get in the end zone. I prefer Traquan Smith, Emmanuel Sanders attacking those guys as the wild card flex plays over Latavius Murray. But Murray could get in the end zone. There is no promise of that, but I'm sticking with Kamara. I'm staying away from Drew Brees. I'm not interested in Brees on the road without Michael Thomas and Jared Cook. The Chargers versus the Buccaneers. And the key here is the injuries. So on the defensive side of the ball, let's talk about the Chargers first. Chris Harris is out, and it's kind of that perfect storm. With Chris Godwin out and also Chris Harris out, that kind of leaves a nice matchup in the slot for a guy like Scotty Miller. I think Scotty Miller, because of this injuries on the wide receiver 3 map, as Mike Evans will see a lot of Casey Hayward on the outside. On the offensive side of the ball for the injuries for the Chargers, you have Brian Bulaga and Trey Turner are both out. This is very bad news for this run game. I do not like Joshua Kelly. Get away from him if you can. This is not good game flow. They're +7. They're actually giving 7 points on the road, so I'm not expecting anything from Joshua Kelly in this one. Austin Eckler's still a play. I think he's going to rack up a lot of receptions, especially if they're trailing in this game on the road. He might not have a big day running the football, but he will make up for it in the pass game. Now, Mike Williams is also out and Tyrod Taylor, so you're going to see more Justin Herbert again. I think this is good news for Hunter Henry, who the Tampa Bay Buccaneers is very susceptible to tight ends. So I think Hunter Henry is a great start this week. I think Keenan Allen in a tough matchup is also a start because you're, like I said, garbage time. He's going to get you at least 3 to 4 catches late, probably get you about 40, 50 yards again late in this game. Maybe we're trying to play some catch up, so I'm okay with Keenan Allen. On the Buccaneers side, like we just touched on, the injury to Chris Godwin does leave a void. I think Scotty Miller, like I said, is a wide receiver 3 start. Outside of that, I think the main start of the week is going to be Ronald Jones without Leonard Fournette in the lineup. So the matchup's very good. It's versus the LA Chargers. I think that Ronald Jones needs to seize the moment. I think he's this week's Devin Singletary. We saw last week when there was no Zach Moss. I think we saw a big week from Devin Singletary. I think Ronald Jones is that guy this week. I'm still starting Mike Evans in a tough matchup versus Casey Hayward, but I would definitely fade him in DFS. I'm also sitting Tom Brady. I did not sign up for Tom Brady to elevate people around him in a new scheme. The reason why I signed up for Tom Brady is because he has Chris Godwin, you would have Mike Evans, and then you'd have Rob Gronkowski, O.J. Howard as supplemental weapons. I'm not interested when those guys are out, so I'm sitting Brady. I'm rolling with Ronald Jones. I'm playing Scotty Miller as a wide receiver 3. And I think even Mike Evans is a wide receiver 3 only this week. And I'm staying away from the tight ends. I think Gronkowski, if you're in a pinch, actually could have some production. But because of the line being at home, 7-point favorites, this one might get away early. There might not be a lot of production for the pass game. All right, so let's talk quickly about the Jags versus the Bengals. Now, really for the Jaguars, they have a very good matchup versus the Bengals run defense with Geno Atkins and Mike Daniels out again. I think you'll keep rolling with James Robinson. Don't even think twice about it. I think the pass game is a little more question marks. We have seen guys beat the Bengals secondary. Greg Ward did it last week. 2 weeks ago, it was Odell Beckham on limited pass volume. So I think DJ Chark, if he's in your lineups. I think a sleeper this week is Keelan Cole. The reason why is Mackenzie Alexander, who's the slot cornerback for the Bengals, is going to be out in this game. I think that does open up some opportunities for a guy like Keelan Cole as the number 2 option. I know he had a down week, but remember the first 2 weeks he did very well. At least 5 receptions scored in multiple games. Now, for the Bengals side, I do like the Joe Burrow, the volume they're getting. They're leading the NFL in dropbacks. They throw a bunch, which is good news. We did see T. Higgins kind of leapfrog the depth chart a little bit. He did run the most routes last week. He is a guy you want to keep monitoring. But I think the true play this week is Tyler Boyd. So Tyler Boyd, like I touched on in my previous podcast, I'm not going to go into too much. He's the best matchup of these guys. I think you keep rolling with Tyler Boyd, and I'm kind of fading Joe Mixon in this matchup, especially now with the chest injury. So he might not be someone you start. I think Tyler Boyd and maybe even Joe Burrow, because of the pass volume, could be a fantasy viable player this week. Now, next up is the Vikings versus the Texans. This game is on and playing. The Vikings are getting 3.5 points on the road versus the Texans. So I do like this. There's a lot of injuries to the Vikings secondary, and that's great news for Will Fuller and Deshaun Watson. I think Deshaun Watson gets right in this game. I think this is his breakout game of 2020. I think him and Will Fuller connect big in this matchup. Now, the interesting thing about the injuries to the Vikings secondary is that Jeff Gladney, who's the rookie, actually has been playing very well, has now kicked into the slot. So he could probably keep up with Randall Cobb. So I do like the outside receivers in this one. I do like Brandon Cooks as like a desperation wide receiver 3. I'm definitely riding Will Fuller in this game. And I really like the matchup for David Johnson is winnable in this one at home, slightly favored. I do think David Johnson does give you a little bit more of a productive day after having 2 slower games the last 2 weeks. Now, outside of those guys, let's flip over to the Vikings side. And there's no notable injuries for the Texans, so we can kind of just go visit my podcast from earlier in the week. But I'm starting Dalvin Cook. I'm rolling with Justin Jefferson as Houston's more susceptible to slot receivers. And I'm still playing Adam Thielen, even though the Texans have been good against outside wide receivers. You know, I think it's been a product of circumstance with Deontay Johnson getting hurt last week, etc. So I think Adam Thielen's in your lineup. I think this is going to be a fun game to watch. So I think that's pretty much where I stand with these guys. As for the next game, probably the game that's going to be most intriguing of the week, Seattle versus the Dolphins. All right, so let's talk about the Seahawks versus the Dolphins, probably one of my favorite games. Let's start on the Dolphins' offensive side first. Now, really with Ryan Fitzpatrick, he's probably my starter of the week at quarterback just because of the matchup, but also the injuries to the Seattle secondary. They'll be down without Jamal Adams, which is big news for Mike Gesicki. I think Mike Gesicki is now on the tight end 1 radar because of that injury. I do think because of the game flow, they're being home. They're 5.5 underdogs at home versus Seattle. Seattle has seen the most dropbacks in the NFL this season on defense. So I think Ryan Fitzpatrick, Devontae Parker is the start of the week. I think he should be in all your DFS lineups. He should be awesome in this game. See, no one lets up more points to wide receivers. I think Preston Williams could be in your lineup as a wide receiver 3 because he has a nose for the end zone, so he's probably a good bet to get in the end zone this week, especially with Jamal Adams and Quentin Dunbar, who is one of their top corners, is out of this game. So I do like that from that standpoint. For the Miami Dolphins, I do believe that if you're really desperate, Isaiah Ford has been getting a lot of run in the slot, and then Seattle lets up the most receiving yards and production to the slot. So I think Isaiah Ford could be a very big deep sleeper. If you really are desperate in a deeper league, Ford could be on the fantasy radar because there could be a lot of success through the air. Myles Gaskins he's gonna struggle on the ground, and I don't think this is conducive for him to be a great on the ground, but he gets 5, 6, 7 targets a game. So I do love Myles Gaskins to continue his production. I think he can get you combined like 80 yards and a couple receptions. You got double-digit fantasy points. You're good to go. On the opposite side, it's kind of obvious. Chris Carson probably has the best run game matchup on the week according to Football Outsiders DVOA run metrics. So you're starting Chris Carson, you're starting DK Metcalf, you're starting Tyler Lockett, you're starting Russell Wilson, and that is it. I am not getting cute and starting Greg Olsen. All right, next game we're going to talk about is the Browns versus the Cowboys. This is another fun one. Let's start with the Browns side. Now, it's important to note that the last 2 weeks, last week I was high on Jarvis Landry. I thought he could get it done. The problem was that the Browns did not throw the football again. They went up big, and they barely threw. I think they threw 7, 8 times total in the second half because they were up big in that game. That's not going to happen again. I think this is the game where Baker Mayfield, Jarvis Landry, Odell Beckham, and maybe even Austin Hooper finally go off. I talk in detail about that, so I'm starting all those guys. I'm starting Nick Chubb. I love the Browns on the road, a little bit underdogs against the Cowboys. Same thing on that side. For the Cowboys, I think you're firing up everybody as well. I talk about this in a lot of detail. I'm kind of fading in the sense that Michael Gallup, I think, is going to be more of a fringe wide receiver 3. I think the volume's coming down in this one. I think where you attack the Browns secondary is at tight end and also in the slot. So I do think that because of the way the Browns defense is, that Michael Gallup is not a slam dunk pick because he's not the number 1 in targets. It's Amari Cooper, and he doesn't have the matchup like CeeDee Lamb. So he's still a wide receiver 3, but I would fade him in DFS. All right, Cardinals versus the Panthers. All right, let's talk about the Cardinals versus the Panthers. And I think the biggest thing I want to say here is Cardinals on the road against the Panthers are the favorite. And I'm a little concerned because there's injuries to Christian Kirk and DeAndre Hopkins. If both those guys are out, I'm less interested in both offenses because I think the defenses could keep up with these offenses. What I mean by that is the main guys. So Mike Davis is a slam dunk start. Kenyon Drake is a slam dunk start plus a DFS start. Get him in your DFS lineups. This is the week he goes off. Not only can you beat Carolina on the ground, they're 29th in adjusted line yards, but you also can beat them through the air. They're one of the worst defenses at covering running backs as well. So you're starting Kenyon Drake, you're starting Mike Davis. I'm not worried about those guys. Where I am worried is if DeAndre Hopkins is out and Christian Kirk. Andy Isabella is an interesting, intriguing wide receiver 3 this week. I think that Larry Fitzgerald is a locked-in wide receiver 3 in PPR. Now, the problem, though, is I don't think they're going to be explosive. I think you're going to see more of a LA Chargers versus Panthers game than you saw when you had that big game versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers a couple weeks ago. So what do I mean by that? I think the Cardinals secondary is elite. They are one of the best at shutting down wide receivers. So Robbie Anderson and DJ Moore are going to need game flow to help them out. And if there is no DeAndre Hopkins, I'm fading everybody in this game. I don't love DJ Moore or Robbie Anderson unless I know that Cardinals are at full strength and they can put up points on the Carolina defense. I don't think I'm interested in seeing what's going to happen there. So I'm going to fade everybody across the board if DeAndre Hopkins is outside of the run game. So that's how I feel about that. Now, let's go to the Colts and Bears. And there has been some notable injuries. Michael Pittman's out. Malik Hooker is out, so that is good news. But one of the things I touched on in my opportunities analysis, I did talk about the Bears and how they're going to be looking at a much lower pass volume. Now, the Colts should be theoretically looking at more pass volume this week, which should be good for T.Y. Hilton. But this game's on the road with a low over-under, on the road in Chicago and with a low over-under. So I'm not really feeling anybody outside of the ground games. I do think I think the best plays of the week are probably the Colts DST and the Bears DST. I think the Bears DST is being overlooked in fantasy. I see him on a lot of my waiver wires. If you're desperate and looking for a defense to play, I like the Bears. Because I'm not excited for any of the offensive weapons. I think the Colts and the Bears run games are average. I think they're both going to, in the sense that in the matchup. So I think they're both going to win on the ground, but neither matchup is a slam dunk top 10, lock and loaded matchup. So I do like both defenses. I think T.Y. Hilton is one more week away from breaking out. I think this week he's going to have a nice game, but Calvin Ridley last week at home had 5 for 100, but prior to that, we saw similar receivers like Darius Slayton and Marvin Jones struggle against these corners. Those speed outside guys did not really do much versus the Bears secondary. So I'm a little concerned that T.Y. is going to have another, 4 for 60, and that's it. So I think T.Y. Hilton is a very uninspiring wide receiver 3. How you do beat the Bears, though, is with tight end. So the problem is it Mo Alley Cox or Jack Doyle? I think Jack Doyle, to me, is still getting the routes over Mo Alley Cox. So I think I would lean Jack Doyle over him. But I think really I'm staying away from everybody outside of Jonathan Taylor and David Montgomery in this matchup. And I think I'm going to roll with the defenses in this one. Oh, Allen Robinson. I'm sorry, guys. Allen Robinson's always a must start. He's just getting the pass volume. So I think it's Allen Robinson, David Montgomery, Jonathan Taylor, and the defenses. All right, so Ravens versus the Redskins. And this is a prime example. We've talked about this. You can check out my podcast from earlier in this week. I've talked about this deeply. But Jimmy Smith is out, and Ronnie Stanley, it looks like he's out to the left tackle. So Jimmy Smith has been a safety covering tight ends. I think Logan Thomas, to me, is a very interesting tight end this week. I think Logan Thomas might be one of those post-site sleepers. Everyone loved him last week against the Browns. He didn't deliver. He only had 4 catches, 30-something yards. I think this week he has a very good matchup at home as 13-point underdogs. I think you're going to see a lot of pass volume in the second half, a lot of garbage time. And I think Logan Thomas has an opportunity to secure some good catches and maybe even get in the end zone. It went to Dontrell Inman last week, the 2 touchdowns. The problem with Logan Thomas, he hasn't been a big yardage guy. So when they're playing this catch-up mode stuff and they're trying to challenge defense, it's going to Terry McLaurin. So I think this week Terry McLaurin's still a start in a tough matchup because of the game flow. I think you're really rolling the dice. Mark Ingram does have a very good matchup, but he only probably will have a half to get it done. So if he doesn't get in the end zone in the first half, he might lay another dud for you, like a 10 for 60, and you don't get a touchdown in your SOL. So I think he's like an RB3 this week, because I think they go up big and Gus Edwards finishes the game. I think Mark Andrews and Marquise Hollywood-Brown need to be in your lineups because the matchup is good. Now, like I said, it could be a half, but you have to take the risk with Lamar, of course. But Marquise Hollywood-Brown and Mark Andrews need to be in your lineup as well. And for the Redskins ground game, Antonio Gibson is going to be a bye. I talked about this earlier in the week. He'll be a bye very soon. After this game, another slow game, go get him. His schedule does open up. All right, Giants versus the Rams. Now, when I talked about this a little bit earlier in the week, there isn't many differences, but I will say this. The Giants are 13.5 road underdogs. That means there's going to be a lot of late game pass volume. And I love Darius Slayton, and I think Evan Ingram might be the start of the week at tight end because of the fact that, the Rams are very susceptible versus tight ends. The San Francisco 49ers, who they played last week, are not. So I think Evan Ingram's matchup is much better. I think he has a big game in this one. And I think they play a lot of catch-up. They get their volume back up. So I'm high on Evan Ingram this week. I'm high on Darius Slayton. The Rams have been very good against slot wide receivers. So I don't think Golden Tate has the big game. I think it's going to be Slayton and Ingram. And I'm staying away from the running backs. And I'm staying away from Daniel Jones. On the Rams side, Darrell Henderson, man. I got to admit, I was wrong about him. But I will make up for it this week. I will tell you he's a start. I love the fact that they're 13.5-point home favorites, which is great for the ground game. But also they have Darrell Henderson got a lot of the work in the first half. No Cam Akers. So I think Darrell Henderson is the start. Robert Woods, Cooper Kupp, and Tyler Higbee, it's going to be tough to sit them. But it's going to be who gets the touchdown. You're going to play that Russian roulette. I think Higbee the most of these 3 guys from a matchup perspective. I do think Cooper Kupp would be number 2 and Robert Woods would be number 3. But I do think all of them should be in your lineups because the Rams are at home. Jared Goff always plays better at home. They did look good on the road against Buffalo with all that additional volume from that comeback mode. But you're not going to sit them at home, but just be prepared. Like, these are the problem with these big spreads. Like, you're playing a game where what if they don't get it done in the first half and they're barely throwing in the second? So I do say you got to start him, but I think Darrell Henderson is the best play of the week for the Rams. All right, Patriots Chiefs. We'll see if that game plays out. I think the biggest problem is there's no Cam Newton. So Cam Newton's the major update from an injury perspective. Technically, the ground game should have some success, but the problem is game flow could get real bad. The Chiefs are very heavy home favorites in this one, so I'm not really high to play anybody if Cam Newton's out. I think the Chiefs DST is the one you want out of anybody on the offensive side. On the defensive side, on the other side for the Chiefs, it's interesting because I think you're going to spread the ball around. They use Stephon Gilmore to shadow Sammy Watkins, and Watkins has been a non-factor. Tyreek Hill had one big game and one slow game with Patrick Mahomes versus the New England Patriots. And I do believe that you're going to start Tyreek Hill, you're going to start Travis Kelce, but we just saw what they did to Darren Waller, and I do believe they could do it again versus Travis Kelce. So Kelce, I think these guys are start season long, but I think you're fading him in DFS. I don't think Mahomes and those guys should be in your DFS lineup this week. I still think they get it done season long, but I would fade them in DFS. And Clyde Edwards-Helaire, the same thing, season long start, DFS fade. Bills and Raiders. So the Raiders are -3.5 at home. So that's interesting. The ways you beat the Raiders, let's start with the injuries to the Bills defense. There is no notable injuries for the Bills. I'm sorry, but the Bills offense. Let's talk about the Bills first. I really like Devin Singletary in this game. The Raiders are one of the worst defenses against running backs. So you got to roll with Devin Singletary. I know Zach Moss is back, and I know that makes things a little bit tougher, but this is not the matchup you fade Devin Singletary. I think you continue roll with that Diggs, Josh Allen stack until if it drops off, you're going to keep rolling with it. But overall, I think the Raiders' DST is going to be pretty good versus the Bills. I think they're going to be able to slow them down a little bit. I'm not high on John Brown. Cole Beasley's always a PPR guy, safe, probably 9-10 points, but I'm not excited to play him. So I think the real plays are Devin Singletary, Stephon Diggs, and Josh Allen. And then for the Raiders, I think it's important. I think really it's Josh Jacobs, Darren Waller. Don't overthink it. Darren Waller had a very slow game last week against the Patriots, but going back to the well, the Buffalo Bills aren't great at stopping the tight end, so I'm okay with Darren Waller. I think the sleepers run to Renfrow. With Bryan Edwards and Henry Ruggs out, I think Hunter Renfrow is the start for this team. I think he's a great play. The Bills are not good against slot wide receivers. We've seen that time and time again. Tre'Davious White stays on the outside, so I think you could start Hunter Renfrow this week as a solid wide receiver 3. And I don't think you're really interested in starting Derek Carr because there's a lot of other options like Fitzpatrick and also Baker Mayfield that I like a lot more as a streamer option. All right, Eagles versus the 49ers. The Eagles are 7.5 dogs, and they have nobody to throw to. I mean, all their wide receivers are out. This is very notable. The 49ers secondary is also decimated by injuries. Greg Ward is a start. I think he is a start. I think he's going to get you 6 or 7 catches this week. I know it doesn't seem like it's a sexy play, but at the same time, there's nobody. Dallas Goedert, Deshaun Jackson, Jalen Reagor, Alshon Jeffrey, J.J. Arcega-Whiteside is out. That is 4 of their start. Like it's Greg Ward, Miles Sanders, and Zach Ertz. That's all who's left. So I think you can start those guys. And the injuries. No, Kello Witherspoon, Emmanuel Mosley, Richard Sherman on the defensive side are all out. So I think Greg Ward is fine. I think he could start as a wide receiver 3. I think from the 49ers side, Jerick McKinnon's always going to be a play, especially with Raheem Mostert out and Tevin Coleman out. As 7.5 home favorites, look for Jeff Wilson again to maybe be a closer in this one. But I think the problem is the Eagles' DST is still very good up front, and they're very good at stopping the run. So they're not going to let the 49ers just walk all over them on the ground. So I think Nick Mullins is going to have to challenge them. And with George Kittle back, I think that's great news. George Kittle, Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk. The 49ers are healthy now on offense. It's pretty exciting, except for the running backs. But from the pass-catching core, I think Nick Mullins has a decent game in this one. I think George Kittle has a big game in his game back. I think the interesting thing is that Darius Slay shadows Deebo Samuel. I don't know if that's going to happen. I project it to be a Deebo Samuel shadow coverage matchup, but They might keep him on one side. I think Brandon Ayuk is a very interesting play. I think the 49ers running offense is not going to be able to just run for 150 yards and completely dominate this game. So they're going to have to throw. George Kittle must start. Nick Mullins is like a DFS dart throw. I think maybe he can get you some good solid day there. I think Brandon Ayuk is an interesting play this week at Darius Slay, especially if Darius Slay shadows Deebo Samuel or if Deebo Samuel is limited throughout the game. So I think, though, I'm focused on George Kittle and Jerick McKinnon and maybe Jeff Wilson. And on the Eagles side, I think it's very simple. It's Miles Sanders, Zach Ertz, Greg Ward. You're not playing Carson Wentz. Monday night, Falcons versus the Packers. It sounds like everybody, all systems go. Devontae Adams is going to play. Julio Jones is going to play. Calvin Ridley is going to play. I think those guys are firing up in this matchup. I think what I'm interested, though, is the injuries. So there's injuries to the Falcons secondary again. So they're down 2 safeties. And if with Allen Lazard out, I think Robert Tonyan is like the sleeper tight end of the week. Robert Tonyan ran the 3rd most routes last week of any player on the team. The Falcons have been the 2nd worst team versus tight ends this season. And no Allen Lazard, a banged up Devontae Adams, MVS is on the outside. I truly believe that Robert Tonyan could be an interesting play this week. So I think you're starting Aaron. The ground games are great. Todd Gurley has looked okay, but he's ceding a lot of work to Brian Hill. But I think Todd Gurley is a play this week, even as big road underdogs in this one. But I think it's Aaron Jones. Adams is going to be just amazing. If Adams is any sort of healthy, he's just going to dominate. They don't have a corner on the roster to stop him. Get him in your DFS lineup as you can. Robert Tonyan's my sleeper on that side. And then I think for Matt Ryan, I think it's very intriguing because there are road underdogs in this one. So I think you can start Julio Jones. Jair Alexander is banged up. So if you hear that Jair Alexander is out, that's just big news across the board. But Julio Jones is a must-start. Calvin Ridley's a play again. I think those 2 guys are the only ones I want. I'm not probably excited to start Matt Ryan on the road in Lambeau, but I think he's going to be good enough to support Julio and Calvin Ridley, and I think Todd Gurley can get it done too as well. All right, guys, that's it for the Fantasy Football Databank for Week 4. Please make sure to go follow me on Instagram and Twitter, Fantasy Football X Factor. And then also please make sure you go check out my articles on football.rasball.com and also on Expand the Box Score. I go into a lot of detail about opportunity analysis, a shadow coverage report, and also make sure you subscribe here. So appreciate you guys taking the time We'll talk again soon.